I thought there was a video, but I got a little confused there for a second. How are we doing this morning? Feeling good? Man, what a beautiful day outside. Oh, I was on the welcome team for a moment just to have the sun on my face. It felt so nice. Oh, what a beautiful day. I want to know, by raise of hand, how many of you have a brother or a sister? You have a sibling? Yeah, a lot of us in here have siblings. Do you remember being little with your sibling and just the essence of their being just annoyed you? Do you remember that feeling as a little kid? I remember watching my older sister eat ice cream, and I would just look at her and be like, I hate her face. There's just the sibling kind of rivalry thing that is in, I don't get it. Like you love them and you also hate them. It's this weird feeling. I don't know if you've seen, there's this brother and sister boxing duo that they have all these videos of them just punching each other's lights out. I got one of these videos. I just wanted to just show you a clip of this because it just summarizes sibling rivalry. Can we show that?
准备好了没有？开始。
Like they are swinging to kill. Oh, come on. All right, that's good. That's good. It's just amazing. They are swinging to kill. We are in Genesis, and today we're talking about two siblings, two brothers. Adam and Eve have two sons, Cain and Abel, and one day they both bring offerings to God. And although Cain is the firstborn, God ends up turning his face towards Abel, and he shows Abel, the younger brother, favor. So Cain just immediately he feels anger about this. And you can imagine him kind of asking God, like, what's wrong with my offering? Why are you giving more attention to him? Aren't I the first? I'm the firstborn. Like, I'm the favored one. Don't I deserve your first attention? And God's response to Cain essentially is, Cain, you're assuming that there's no exaltation for you too, just because I went to the lowest, the youngest one first. And so now Cain, God is saying to him, you have a choice, whether you will do good or not do good in this moment. You have a choice. But be careful, he says. And we're going to see this in the passage. God looks at Cain and he says, be careful because there's an animal at your door. There's an animal waiting to attack you at your door. In the story, we'll see that sin is like an animal, a wild animal. And he says, but just like I called your parents to rule over the animals, and they didn't. They let an animal rule them. You have a chance to rule this inner animal. So what are you going to do, Cain? And we know how the story ends. If you went to Sunday school at all growing up, you know that Cain lets the animal within take over. And he murders his brother in cold blood. And in spite of this, we're going to discover in the story that God surprisingly shows him mercy. Just like God didn't enforce the death penalty immediately on Adam and Eve, his parents, in the same way God comes to the murderer Cain, which in the rest of the Torah is a capital crime. And God not only forgives Cain, but he protects him. So if you have a Bible, let's open it to the beginning, Genesis chapter 4, and we're going to start in chapter 4, verse 1. We'll have it on the screen. Here we go. And we're just going to read through this together, and it's a really interesting read. Genesis 4:1. Adam made love to his wife, Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." So Cain is born. Now, his name comes from metalworking. His name literally means metal smithing. He is the first metal worker. His people, his line, are the first metalworking people, and Cain is the first mentioned to build a city. But here, Eve, in essence, says something I think really interesting. She goes, "I have created a man with Yahweh." It's an interesting thing to say. So Cain is the firstborn. Verse 2, keep reading. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. Now, as I said, Cain's name means metalsmith, and now Abel's name means wind or vapor. He's here one moment and gone the next, like his name, vapor. That's about how long Abel is in the story. But Adam and Eve, they've been splitting up the work. One of them tends the flocks, the animals, and the other one works the ground. And they have two boys, and the boys are splitting the work up just like their parents. Cain is working the land, and Abel is tending to the animals. Verse 3. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. So right off the bat, that's rad. That is rad. We know that his parents rebelled and were escorted out of the garden. We've already talked about this, but as the story ends up telling us, they are kind of hanging out near the gate of the Garden of Eden. They bring their offerings to the gate of the garden, the entrance of the Garden of Eden. They bring their offerings to God there to pay homage, to give honor to the Creator. And this is great. Cain is giving what is valuable to him, and this is a really good beginning. Leviticus chapter 2 actually tells us that a food offering is completely legitimate. It's a legitimate offering to give to God. So this is good. He's done well. Verse 4. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. So Abel is next. He comes to the gate, the entrance of the garden. They're not allowed in, but they're there by the door. And he brings something from his responsibility, which is animals. But there's this word here that makes his offering unique. Firstborn. He offers what is first, oldest, first of the flock, first to reach maturity. This is the most valuable. And not only that, not only is it the firstborn, but he also offers from the fat portions of the meat, which if you eat meat, you know this to be true. I love me some ribeye. You know what I'm saying? Oh, it's so tasty. But it's like Abel has read the book of Leviticus before it's even written, because he is bringing the most prime portions to God. So both offerings were good and legitimate, but one is more primo. Cain's isn't bad. It's just that Abel's is more valuable, more of a sacrifice. Let's continue and read the rest of verse 4. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, verse 5, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So what is being said here is that God notices Abel's. He gazes over at Abel's offering. So remember that sibling rivalry thing. Maybe you had a sibling, and you can remember a time when they got more attention than you got, and it filled your little heart with such jealousy. It's amazing how little you can be and how jealous you can be. It's amazing to watch little kids. I love trying to instigate jealousy. It's fun. I've told this story before because it's just so funny. My grandfather was a pastor, and one day he forgot his Bible, and he asked my older sister, "Can I use your Bible when I preach?" And she was like, "Sure." She had her Bible. She handed him the Bible. He goes up on stage, and he's preaching, and he's flipping through her Bible. And then in the middle of his sermon, he goes, "Let me just point something out. I'm using my granddaughter's Bible this morning, and she has so many verses highlighted. Vangela, I'm just so proud of you. You're reading your Bible and you're underlining and you're highlighting. I'm just so proud of you." And I sat in the audience and I was like, oh. I was like, I want that kind of attention. And so I went home and got my Bible, and I just started randomly highlighting sections, just random sections throughout my Bible, just in case one day my grandfather saw my Bible and opened it up, and he would be like, "Oh, you highlight, oh my gosh, Brock, you're so amazing. I never read the thing." God notices the younger brother's offering. He looks over at it with pleasure. He gazes over at Abel's, and Cain notices this, and he's immediately angry. Hot anger comes over him, and his face drops. And God sees this. God notices this. God is very aware of what is going on inside of Cain, the inner turmoil. So let's keep reading. Verse 6. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast?" Verse 7, "If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now, this is a typical Hebrew ancient verse here that's kind of dense, and it has a lot of depth of meaning. I just want to point out a couple of things. God responds to Cain with sort of a riddle. God says, if you do good, won't there be exaltation? That's what we're talking about. Cain has done something good. He has. He brought a good offering. But see, he saw God notice Abel, and Cain is wondering, will I be exalted too? Is there enough goodness in God to reach both Abel and me? Cain thinks there is not. I remember in third grade, I had a best friend. His name was Cody. We had great fun together. We would play together. I would go to his house, hang out. After school, we would play at recess. Every recess, we would play together. But then a new kid came to school. His name was Brian. And Brian had Star Wars figures. Oh my gosh. Now, this is the 80s. And Star Wars was everything. And my parents were not good parents. They did not ever buy me anything Star Wars. And I wanted a Luke Skywalker and a Han Solo. I wanted the Ewoks, and I wanted the toys. I wanted the action figures. I never had anything of that. But Brian, he had, oh my gosh, buckets and buckets full of Star Wars figures. And so I started playing with him at recess instead of Cody. And I went home and I felt conflicted about it. And I told my mom, and I was like, Mom, I'm really good friends with Cody, but Brian has these Star Wars figures and I've been playing with him and I feel bad that I'm not playing with Cody. And I felt like, honestly, as a third grader, I felt like I didn't have enough friendship in me to cover both of them. And my mom said, Brock, you can play with both. You can be friends with both. You can give attention to both of them. God says, I gave my attention to the offering of your younger brother. He offered what was firstborn. Dude, it's special. You know this. So my attention just went to him first. But if you do good, isn't there enough exaltation for you too? God is saying there's enough blessing to go around. I just went to him first. Cain, you did good. There's enough love in my heart for you too. But Cain doubts this. He doesn't believe that there's enough goodness in God to cover both of them. He doesn't think that God has enough friendship to go around. And so just like the serpent thought in the garden that God really isn't good, Cain is doubting God. You ever doubted God? You ever doubted that he would come through for you? You ever doubted that he would bless you? You ever wondered why he's withholding his blessing from you? You ever wondered, man, I just don't know if he's going to show up. I've been praying the same prayer, asking the same thing, month after month, even year after year. This is where Cain is at. It's much quicker for him. In the moment, he feels like, I missed it. Cain got the attention. There's no attention left inside of God for me too. So then God offers Cain a test on whether he will do good or not do good. This is the same test that Cain's parents were offered, whether they were going to do good or not do good, or they use the word knowing good and not knowing good. It's the same exact test. But can he trust God's method and timing of his blessing? Dude, that's huge. I'm going to say it again. Can Cain trust God's method and timing of his blessing? Just because he went to Abel doesn't mean that he won't also come to Cain. So again, can Cain trust God's method and timing? My sister, a year ago, was diagnosed with cancer, a terrible cancer. A kind of cancer that the doctors literally said, you probably are not going to make it. It was progressed. It was way down the road. It was a late diagnosis. And she immediately became overwhelmed with fear, but also overwhelmed because of what had already been happening. See, her younger daughter, her 3-year-old precious little girl, was regularly having seizures. Every day, seizures. A couple times a day, seizures. So she has this daughter having seizures. She has a husband who runs a restaurant in Orange County. He's consumed at work. She has this little girl having seizures every day. And now she is diagnosed with horrific, deadly cancer. And she just starts praying. God, you got to heal. I don't think I can do this. He doesn't heal her. Months go by, no healing. She's overwhelmed in the midst of her little girl suffering. Now she is starting chemotherapy, and she goes through chemotherapy, and she feels all alone. And I get with her, and I'm like, how are you really doing? Are you feeling hope? Do you have any hope in you? She's like, I have no hope. I'm like, Sasha, your thinking is so vital. She's like, I just don't trust God anymore. He's not helping my daughter. He's not helping me. I just don't trust him anymore. She wasn't able to trust the method or the timing of God's blessing. She goes all through chemotherapy, finishes it. In this past December, she goes in to be scanned to see where she stands. They're saying, you're going to definitely need surgery now after chemo. So she gets the scan. And the doctor comes to her and says, your scans look like, we've never seen this. It looks like your cancer has been surgically removed, like cut out of you. Sasha, you have no cancer. And by the way, her daughter, shockingly, stopped having seizures as soon as Sasha got diagnosed with cancer. Now, she looked back at that and she was like, I didn't trust him the entire time. I didn't think he was good the entire time. Cain cannot trust God's method or his timing. He can't seem to think that God is going to notice him too, that God's goodness will reach him as well, that there's a limit to God's goodness. And what we see here is that sin is crouching at Cain's door and it's ready to take him out. It's a crouching animal ready to attack. 1 Peter 5:8 says this, you can look at it. It says, be alert, Peter says, and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. You ever been taken out by sin? It was like a trap. And all of a sudden, you've done what you swore you'd never do, what you thought you couldn't do. Sin is an animal seeking to take Cain out in this story. Look at the end of verse 7 again. He says, but if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. The word sin here is a beast in the Hebrew. It's an animal. It's a serpent. And God is saying, just like I called your parents to rule over the animals and they didn't. They let the animal rule them. Cain, you have a chance to rule this inner animal that's crouching. And so what are you going to do? Now, verse 8 tells us what Cain does. And he ignores God's warning. Verse 8. Now, Cain said to his brother, hey, Abel, let's go out to the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel, and he killed him. So just like Cain's parents, the animal within rules him. Let's keep reading. Verse 9. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? I don't know, he replied. Am I my brother's keeper? So remember in the garden, Adam and Eve rebel from God, and then God comes to them and says, hey, where are you? Now similarly, Cain kills his brother, and God comes to him and asks, hey, where is Abel? Have you seen him? And Cain is like, Abel who? Oh, wait, yeah, him. Yeah, I haven't seen him. And then he says, am I his keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? And this is really revealing about Cain. This question, am I my brother's keeper, reveals a lot about Cain. See, God cares for his creation. He's called us to care for his creation, to be his image on earth, to image him to each other. Cain is supposed to be his brother's keeper. You are supposed to be your brother's keeper. But he has rejected the image of God inside of him and inside of his brother. And then Cain ends up taking it a step further, and not only does he reject the image of God, but then he kills one of God's images on earth. Let's keep reading, verse 10. Then the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Like you can feel the emotion. "Now you're under a curse, driven from the ground, which opens its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Now, I don't want to just brush this over. Here is the first of many murders. Can you imagine Adam and Eve? What they're thinking? What have you done? They cannot believe that their firstborn has just killed his younger brother. But ultimately, they must be thinking, this is what we did. What we did has led to this. This is the consequence of our rebellion in the garden. The regret, the pain. I can't even imagine. To watch your children make the same mistakes or worse than you is almost unbearable. Now, there is a tremendous consequence to what Cain has done. But what we see here, and you can hear it in the tone, is God, in spite of Cain's terrible, murderous act, forgives and then he blesses. Watch this. Verse 13. Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear." Gang, if you don't know this, young people, look at me. Sin leads to agony. I know this personally. It's never worth it. It initially is so enticing. Dude, it leads to agony. I'm telling you. The adults around you may not be honest about that. Agony. This is more than I can bear. Today, he says, verse 14, "You are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence." Like literally, there's this ache. I've been hanging out by the gate. I've been trying to get as close to you as possible. He goes, "I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Verse 15, "But the Lord said to him, 'Not so.'" He goes, "None of that is true. None of that's true. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So God is generous, and what does Cain do with God's generosity. He goes outside of Eden. Remember, Eden is not just a garden, it's a whole big region. It's a large region. And so he leaves the region of Eden and goes and he lives in Nod. And Nod literally means exiled. He goes and lives in exile. Verse 17. Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. Okay, so that's the story. But what follows is really fascinating. The verses that follow, if you look at that verse, 17, it immediately goes into a genealogy, a 7-generation genealogy that ends with a guy named Lamech in verse 19. Lamech at this point is barely human. He has lost his humanity. He is like an animal, a serpent. The animal within has taken him over, and this is what has become of Cain's line. He takes 2 wives. 1 wife is not enough for him. He takes 2 wives, and then Lamech writes a poem about a man that he murdered for accidentally wounding him. Verse 23, here is the poem that he sings to his wives, bragging about killing a guy. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, which if I ever have 2 wives, I want them to be named this. I don't know. Ada and Zillah, listen to me. And then he speaks in the third person, which is quite annoying. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. So here is someone now rewriting God's mercy and applying it to himself. It's greed, selfishness. Dude, this is ugly. He's bragging on his murder and saying God will protect him. I can do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. So the story begins with Cain feeling jealous about God being generous to his brother. And then here we see humanity has gone. It has turned ugly so stinking fast. So the genealogy that went from Adam to Cain to Lamech, it ends with Lamech's 3 sons. And when you turn to chapter 5, you find a completely different genealogy. Now hold on. Are you with me? I find this interesting. If you don't, crap. A completely different genealogy. Adam and Eve have a 3rd son after Abel's death. His name is Seth. And Seth starts a brand new line. Seth's name means set or placed. Adam says, God has set before me or placed before me a new beginning, a new son. So chapter 4 is tracing Cain's genealogy, but chapter 5 is tracing Seth's genealogy. And they are going side by side, but they are 2 very different family lines. Chapter 4 is the genealogy of the disgruntled, selfish, jealous, and murderous firstborn that leads to Lamech and the rest of his descendants. This line is a distorted image of God. It is the line of the serpent. But chapter 5 traces Seth's genealogy. This chapter is like a reboot. that reminds us that Adam and Eve and then Seth and his descendants were made in the image of God. And in this image, it goes right through Seth, and it goes 10 generations through this line that eventually comes to the one that will crush the head of the serpent. And his name from Seth's line is Jesus. Jesus. What are these two genealogies telling us going side by side? They are saying that there are two very different paths in life. There's a way of the serpent, and then there's a way of true humanity created in God's image. Cain's offspring is the line of the snake. Seth's offspring, which is the line of Jesus, is the line to true humanity, true humanness. Two genealogies. And ultimately, you have to ask yourself, which line am I in? And what we actually discover is that God he's active in both of them. His mercy even reaches over here. Because of his grace, it compels him. And what we discover is that snakes can become humans. But there's a warning, because humans can also become snakes. You can join Cain's line, which leads to death, or you can join Seth's line, which leads to life. And this narrative goes straight through the scriptures over and over and over again. This just keeps getting repeated. Let me show you just two things out of a million. Proverbs 14:12 talks about this line. Look at it with me. It says, there is a way that seems right to a person, but its end is the way to death. This is what it's talking about. There's this line here, the line of Cain, the line of the serpent. It's leading straight to death. This is the agony that he feels, that Cain feels. There's this natural inclination in me to go the way of the animal, to allow the animal within to rule me. And every person in each generation must choose which way they will go. Jesus speaks to this choice. Matthew 7, he talks about the two lines. He says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. What line are you, what's the word? What line are you kind of giving to your children? Perpetuating, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. What line are you, say it again? I'm struggling. Perpetuating. Whoa, why is that hard? Are you holding on to unforgiveness over here? Is there lust and anger controlling you? Are you stuck in addiction? Where are you taking your family? Which line are you passing on? See, the truth is that God wants you to be free. He wants you to walk like a child of God in the line of Seth, in the way of Jesus. I spoke this past Friday at Western Christian High School, and I ended my talk calling them to surrender. I told them about a kid by the name of Isaiah who was on a retreat. This is in the Old Testament. And he has this encounter with God, and he sees God. And God is like, he sees God, and he falls to his knees, and he's just like, God, you are other than, like you are set apart, you are holy. And he looks at himself and he's like, man, I've been living in the line of Cain. All my friends are a mess. We are all broken. We are all full of rage and wrath and anger and lust and greed. We are a mess. And he says, woe is me. He's ripping his clothes. Woe is me, for I am undone. I am unclean. And God allows Isaiah to overhear a conversation. And God says, Isaiah's right. He's right. His friends are a mess. Humanity has lost their humanness. Who should we send to bring them to this other line? And Isaiah, this kid, stands up and says, I don't have any experience. I know I don't know much. But here I am. Send me. I surrender it all. That's what I did when I was 18 years old. And in my life, I noticed that I've had to surrender all the time, regularly, because I just keep getting pulled back. I'm like, no. I need to surrender again. I've started collecting anger again. I started collecting I started letting lust or greed come back into my, no. I am not going the way of Cain. I am not in the line of the serpent. I will not image him. I will image God. That's the call. And that's why I stand before you here this morning, pleading with you. You don't have to hold on to these things anymore. They're killing you. The numbness, the apathy, that's not who you are. The stuckness, the lack of hope. God wants to do a work in your life. He wants to wake you up to a brand new way of living. Oh my goodness. And all it is just you going, I'm done. I remember asking my friend who was in AA, I said, there's this kid who's on drugs and I cannot get him off of drugs no matter what I do. He just always goes back. And my friend goes, Brock, you're never going to be able to help him. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, until those drugs stop working. Until he realizes that he has come to the end of his rope. I hope your rope is short. I pray your rope is short. I'm going to invite the worship team to come up and our prayer teams. We want to pray for you. There are times when it just feels like something holy is happening and we must act. And so I'm going to invite you to come and allow these people to pray for you. Or maybe to come and just kneel and surrender and get right. But you have a choice to make, like God gives Cain a choice. And I pray that your choice leads you to surrender.